Hi there, it's William from Boxer 2 Valve, and we're back at this project with this R80, and we've been just taking things apart, taking the final drive. We took the final drive swing arm off, the transmission out. We did replace the clutch. It's the only progress we've made because I needed to secure the crankshaft before we could move on with the rest of the stuff. But right now we're still in the disassembly mode. Today we're going to take the cylinders off. Start by taking the spark plugs out. Okay, to take the valve covers off, there's a couple of little nuts back here. 10mm wrench is what you'll need to remove those. And a little washer behind them. So now this 13mm nut in the center, and that's it. Valve cover will come off. It's a little bit tight. I can just very gently give it some help with a screwdriver. And there's usually always a washer in there, so that's why I put my finger in there so I don't lose it. And so. All right, so what I see here, first of all, is that the valve cover gasket is stuck to the valve cover itself. Usually not ideal. I kind of rather have them stuck to the cylinder head, but we will look at that on reassembly. Also, something's going on here. There's a nut on this stud. There's not supposed to be that. I think maybe there's some thread damage. We'll have to look at that. But otherwise, next thing is to remove the cylinder head. And I like to always do that at top dead center compression because then there's no tension on the valve springs. It just comes apart nicer that way. And it's easy enough to find out. You could look through the window, but to know you're on compression, just hold your finger over the spark plug hole, turn the crank, with a 6mm Allen at the front in clockwise direction. And as you feel compression, you can hear it too. There you go. And so once you're at that point, you know that that's the compression stroke on that cylinder, and you can verify that. Now you should have valve clearance in a perfect world on both valves, unless they're really tightened up, but you have valve clearance. So I'm at top dead center compression, I know that. I'll show that one more time. Hold your finger. You can hear it. Now you can feel a little vacuum. Nothing happening. And now you hear that compression. And this piston comes to the top. And that's close enough. That's in the ballpark of where you need to be. Okay. First I'm going to take the top and bottom nuts off. And the valve cover actually makes a really handy place to store all your parts. So I'm just going to put my various bits in the valve cover for right now. Okay, so here's another thing. This bike's been apart before. I'm pretty confident in that because these nuts are on the wrong way. The little shouldered area goes down and not up. So these are installed perfectly incorrectly. So I'm going to just loosen them in sort of this cross pattern. Not that it really matters that much. But that's about it. And you see, because we're at top dead center, it's not doing anything weird with the valve springs or anything. No tension on the push rods. Oh, and here's another thing. That's funny. There's a little dot on the rocker shafts, and those need to be facing out. And this one is facing out, this one's facing in. So, okay, but I guess it still works that way. Okay, so now you can just take the whole rocker assembly off like that. And this will all come apart. And we'll look at all this later on. But just take the whole thing, and I'm just going to drop it in the valve cover for right now. It will take note of a couple things just for kicks. Look at the wear on the rocker arm. but we'll have a look at this in more detail later. I'm just going to set them in there. Okay, and these have these this version has these washers that you can remove. So this is the latest version rocker arm assembly, basically. I think it started in '85 with the monolever. They made some upgrades to the valve train and to the rocker arm bearings in particular. So now you can remove the push rods. Not looking too bad. And set those down. Okay, now at this point, we should be able to remove the cylinder head. Sometimes the gaskets are kind of stuck. So you can just tap on it with a mallet. What works really well too, though, is one of these plastic wedges. This is a really handy tool. And so I just wedge this between the cylinder head and the cylinder and leverage it right off, and I'm not going to do any damage or scratch anything up. So the washer there. Okay, now the head comes off. Oop, one more washer there. Okay, so that's that. Now we can have a look at these more in detail later. We're just kind of in tear apart mode, and then we'll deal with each component as we put it all together again. But it doesn't look too terrible. Okay, now we can take the cylinder off. So just pull that back this far and then put your hands in behind the piston and gradually pull it back until you can actually feel the top of this recess or this flat spot. You can actually feel the change there. It's a solid stop. And I'm just going to show you this way because if you were just resealing the cylinders and you didn't have concern about the condition of the pistons or the cylinders or anything like that, there's no reason to take the whole piston out. You can just basically reveal the wrist pin, and then we'll take the wrist pin out. I'll show you all that right now. So, okay, you want to first you need to remove the snap ring. So for that, you'll need some form of snap ring pliers, and it's always not a bad idea to have a screwdriver handy to kind of help with the removal. Once you have it spread apart, sometimes see I just was able to catch it before the snap ring pliers popped off and was able to get that off of there. Always want to replace these for sure. So most of the time, you'll be able to just push the wrist pin through the piston on these. But if you might want to just like rotate a little bit, but you should be able to push those out, unlike the earlier models where you really needed a pressing tool. These go in just pretty much finger tight. So I'm going to go ahead and take the wrist pin out all the way. And then as I remove the cylinder, make sure that you support the rod. Don't allow it to just fall. Just set it in there very carefully like that. Now the cylinder can be removed, and if we were so inclined, if we were just doing a reseal, we could clean this all up, change the push rod seal tubes, change the O-rings here, etc. The O-ring here, you could do all that, put all that together, wrist pin back in, new circlips, and the bike would be resealed. Kind of thinking we're going to do 1000cc cylinders on this, so I might not really need these. I'll save them. They're good, seem like good cylinders. They might make another bike happy someday. Before I go over and do the same thing to the other side, I want to do something with this rod because I'm going to be rotating the engine. What works really well is if you just have a pretty heavy duty rubber band and slide that through and over the studs like that. And look at how that just really supports it. It's not in any danger of smacking down on the cylinder. You can run in and out, and that's a good way to do it. So now I'm going to go over to the other side and remove the cylinder, take it down to this level on the left. Okay, typically on this left cylinder, one difference is that pushrod tube seal kind of contacts the frame a little bit, so you'll feel some resistance there. What you can do at this point is just pop that off. Okay, so pull that back like there. Okay, there we go. Both sides are like that. Now, next thing we want to do is definitely always have a look at the lifters, and it's always a good idea to also have a look at the con rod bearings, especially on an older bike like this. We've seen a lot of worn parts on this bike, so I'm kind of actually very curious to see what we now run into. We'll find out. So I've got everything secured. I'm going to start with these lifters. To pull the lifters out, one could use a magnet. Some folks do. I don't like to do that. Take a piece of safety wire or something like that, a welding rod, and then put a nice sharp bend in the last couple millimeters of the wire. And you can sort of fish that into the hole of the lifter. And then pull it out like that. Reason being, if the lifters are good, I don't want to apply a magnet to them in case they get magnetized. So this one's got the beginning. Yeah, it's got a little bit of pitting going on, just starting. So that one I'm going to replace for sure. Let's have a look at the next one. This one has much more advanced pitting. You can actually probably see that fairly closely. Those pits, chunks of metal missing. I've seen much worse. These are not bad. So luckily, probably caught it in time. I haven't really looked at the cam, but it's probably in okay condition. But these two lifters are definitely candidates for replacement. Okay, it's almost like progressively worse. It's like a little bit, a little more, yet more. This one's pretty shot. And let's see what this one shows us. Actually, this one is the best of all four. But we're still going to replace it just because. But this one's actually has really no bad pitting, just some wear. So anyway, so that's that. Now, let's have a look at the connecting rods. When you're this far apart, it's just not a bad idea to replace the main bearings, or very minimum, have a look at them. You will always want to replace the bolts, however, so that you have to consider that investment in doing so. But it's a nice thing to know what kind of condition your crankshaft's in. You're going to need a special tool for this. This is a 12-point serrated M10 driver. That's what that bolt requires. This is something that we do offer, and it's not the most common thing to find, but they're out there. But having something like this is good. An extension I find very useful because I can get in past where the studs are. See, I'm behind the studs. And then just go ahead and loosen these bolts. And here again, those rubber bands come in really handy because it just sort of holds everything in place. Okay, with the bolts out, you should be able to just more or less pull it apart by rocking the rod. There are two pins that are at the mating surface, and so sometimes those can be a little bit difficult to dislodge. I've got it loose, but it's not coming all the way. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and grab this wrist pin bushing. With the wrist pin installed, put my little wedge in there to hold it, like so. And then give the crank a little turn, and that should pop it out. There we go. Okay, so I got the two parts dislodged. Now I'm reaching around the other side to kind of hold the bottom end out. And so there's the top part of the connecting rod. And then I'm just going to spin that around like that to remove it. So now we've got the entire connecting rod out. Let's have a look and see what kind of condition this is in. Okay, not terrible by any means. These haven't spun or anything really nasty like that, but these little spots here are little pits where the surface is starting to deteriorate. There's quite a lot of wear marks on there. I think definitely that these connecting rod bearings should be replaced, so definitely we'll do that. These are these pins here, fit together like that. Oh, and by the way, the pins are always facing the front of the motorcycle. And it's always also a good idea to not mix the rods up, I think. I always try to put things back the way they come, apart. So for right now, just set that one there and go about the task of removing the other side. So here's an alternative way of separating the connecting rod. You want to unscrew the bolts and just put them in so they're in by a few threads, like 2 or 3 turns. So they're kind of loose. You can feel that they're loose. You pull on it like that. This one came apart easier than the other side. And then reach around and hold the connecting rod bearing in place. Okay, that's nice and loose now. Take these bolts out the rest of the way. It's possible to go in and just get a finger on the lower part of the connecting rod as you remove the bolts. There we go. This one fell back, but it's no big deal, just falls down. Now we can have a look and see what kind of condition these are in. Pretty much the same story, just normal wear. So got pretty lucky. Okay, so now that we got the lifters out, the connecting rod bearings out, we can have a little look inside. Just need a nice little light, something like this, and something to turn the crank. And we can go in and have a look and see what shape those bearing journals are in. You can see there's no scoring, just your basic wear. I mean, it looks to be in very, very serviceable shape. Same with the other journal here. Nothing too alarming. And then the as far as the camshaft is concerned, kind of look at the lobes. The lifters weren't that terrible that they would have eaten them up too much, but still, Looks to me just like normal wear for an engine of this age and mileage, and nothing, it's not serviceable in my opinion. All right, so I'm gonna clean up things a little bit here, and then we can start taking the front of the motor apart, get this thing down to just the block basically, and then build it all back together again. Okay, so I went ahead and removed the tank and side covers, and what we're going to do now is basically we're going to take the timing cover off, and before that I'm going to start by removing the starter cover. There we go. So nice and easy to take these things apart when all the other components are gone. Now, what I'm probably going to do actually is go ahead and repaint this. Some of the paint sort of chipping off. I'll have it powder coated and redo the raised BMW and all that. And at the same time, probably do the timing cover too. The paint's looking a little bit worn. Okay, so next thing is going to be removing the components here in the front. And we can actually begin with the alternator. So I'm just going to go ahead and unplug the wires. Actually, it doesn't matter which wires go where on this part of it. So it's not important. These two on the brushes. Before you remove the stator, what you can do is, I'll show you how to deal with these brushes so you don't damage them. Okay, I've got a very small screwdriver here. I'm just going to pull the spring up like so and just set it on the edge of the brush holder, and then pull the brush by the wire like that. So you see what I've got now is the brush sticking up a little bit and the spring sort of on the side of it still under tension, and that way there's nothing underneath, so that when I pull this all apart I'm not like dragging it across the slip ring. So I can do that on the other side as well. There we go, both of them in the same condition there. Okay, now we're ready to just remove these 3 bolts. Okay, these parts are usually a pretty tight fit, and you'll need to probably use some way. You'll need some way to pry it apart. What works pretty well for me is this heel bar, and you can actually just get that down inside here. Let's see here. You can just sort of wedge that against the case a little bit and pop it out. There we go. Just needs a little bit of help getting out of its perch there. There, now you can really get a pretty good look at how I did that with the brushes, how they're kind of sticking out the back, and just the spring is sort of on the side holding it in place. So they're pulled back away. That way no damage is done when the part's removed. Probably gonna wind up putting new brushes in anyway, but you know, we're not gonna make that assumption. A lot of times you're gonna do a repair, there's nothing wrong with the parts, and you just use the old parts, put it back together if they're still in good condition. This is a special tool that's used for removing the alternator rotor. And so first we need to just loosen this bolt in here, and that can be a little bit tough to do. Since the motor is completely apart, there's no resistance here whatsoever. So what works is I'll go to the other side, and I'm just gonna basically take a screwdriver and put it in the timing hole against one of the starter teeth. There's not that much tension, just to loosen the bolt. That's a quick and easy way to hold the motor from turning. Okay, need to unscrew and remove that bolt entirely. Then the special tool is screwed in. Need to then tighten that bolt and it'll pop that rotor right off. Here again, I'm going to just hold it, the crankshaft with a screwdriver here. And sort of be careful because when it pops on, it wants to jump. So you have to sort of be ready for that action and then remove the part. The next thing I'm going to do is take the ignition unit off, the hall sensor. And this is typically held in place with a zip tie right there, so you want to cut that off. And then you need a very small screwdriver to get in here and sort of pick at that spring clip so that you can just push it away out of its recess, or you can just there you go, just kind of pushed it out of there. And then you can actually just remove that clip entirely and then unplug. And then it's not a bad idea to, while you're at it, just go ahead and put the clip right back on again. That way you won't lose it. And it does not need to be removed for reinstallation. Okay, now just 2 more screws to remove here. And that comes right off. You always want to replace that O-ring here, and we'll get into timing when we reassemble, so I'm not worried about the position of it. It only goes really on one way and pretty easy to deal with. Okay, next up is the diode board. So we'll go ahead and unplug the wires and unbolt it from the motorcycle. Okay, once that's loose, then you can unplug the wires from the back. You'll notice that there's this blue wire that is getting connected to this vertical terminal, and then you have this multi-plug. Sometimes it's 3 individual plugs, depends on the version. But those 3 were plugged in here, and the blue wire was plugged on here. And then this one, you can just leave it attached. It doesn't matter. Goes down, attaches to the Y connection here on the stator, like that. Now this wire, we can just go ahead and fish through here. And this is available as a replacement. This one is probably serviceable. Looks like it has a little wear on the sheathing, but otherwise, it's good. You always want to look for corrosion here. Very, very common. You'll find some green goo in there, and it's in here as well. It's just almost better to throw a new one of these on. They're rather inexpensive. Now we want to pay attention to how the wires are routed. There's this one here. This wire goes through the top. It actually goes back to the starter. So make yourself some mental notes or write it down or take some pictures. Get your phone out, take a picture of how this is all done. But basically from this wire harness here, it passes through there. You just want to always look at how things happen. And then you can get in there and just unplug that wire from the starter. Like that. Just gonna get that up out of the way. We've got those wires coming in the back. So now the timing cover is really more or less free of anything holding it back from coming out. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all the fasteners, a couple on top and more or less all the way around here. So I've taken out all of the Allen bolts. These are all M6 Allen bolts. I've taken those out. Now there's a couple of other fasteners here that you need a 6mm Allen wrench for, and those are these barrel nuts that are located in this area. Now one of them, somebody had this apart before, as we've already determined. Somebody put a regular hex nut on here. Nothing wrong with that, but there's a barrel nut out there somewhere floating around that should have been there. But anyway, the other ones are still there. And go ahead and take those off. Anyway, that's what that part looks like. It's basically a little barrel looking thing, threaded on one end, M6, 6mm Allen on the other. And these things kind of been over tightened. It's all kind of flared out. So it should be replaced. And I think that's a good idea. There's a washer goes underneath it too, very important. So using a small magnet, I'm going to go in there and get those washers out of there. All right, all the fasteners are out, and now we want to remove the timing cover. Now this is what the factory tool looks like. It bolts on. We may end up using it, and you attach these 3 screws, you tighten this, and it pulls out. Now, I did come up with an alternative to this. If you go to our other video series about the R90/6 and you look at episode number 10, you'll see a way that you can actually make something really similar to this with just pipe fittings from the hardware store. But so since we've already gone through that, I'm just going to go ahead and use the factory tool because I have it here. But before I even do that, sometimes these things will come off on the road. So let's try that first. Sometimes you can just grab it and rock it, and yeah, in this case we're lucky. So you don't even really need a tool in this case. So always try that first. If you get one that's stubborn, then you know you'll have the resources on the other video series to make a tool. So this is kind of funky. Yeah, it's definitely been apart before, but that's okay. That happens a lot. So this is going to require a lot of cleanup, a lot of thorough cleaning, and we'll get to that in a bit. Since we're still in disassembly mode, let's keep going and go ahead and remove the starter so we get pretty much down to the nitty-gritty here. Got to get this breather hose out of the way. And then first I'm going to do is disconnect the wire, the big wire that goes to the battery. Unscrew that. Right, so we've got this little bracket at the back. Now, if you still have the timing cover installed, then what would you do, right? Well, it's still possible. Because if you were just doing if you were just dealing with the starter, this fastener is still pretty easily accessible. So you would just need to remove the front cover, and then you'd be able to access the bolt that I'm about to remove. Okay, then the 13mm nuts on the back here. Once you've got the nuts off of the back, then you can sort of push the screws forward using an Allen wrench or something like that. Just get them almost all the way out of there. And with that done, you'll be able to just lift the starter right out. This is actually a Bosch starter, which is just fine, but later on they went to the Vallejo starters, which is really the best replacement available today, the Vallejo. The nice thing about the Bosch is they can be rebuilt, but we'll check that out. It'll be in the future thing that we'll look at, but that's what we have here. And so the next thing we need to do, we're really getting down to where there's not much left. It's just the motor block. It's really down to the most essential part. And you can see just how much you can do with the motor in the frame. The frame makes an excellent engine stand in this way. So I've got quite a lot of cleanup work to do here. I need to remove the gasket, scrape that all off, get this all kind of cleaned up, and then we're going to go ahead and clean the engine as best I can inside the frame and start putting things back together. But that'll be in the future. Right now, we're going to call this episode a wrap. We pretty much have gutted this motor, and on a future episode, we're going to be looking at doing the timing chain replacement and then reassembling the timing cover, putting everything all back together again, bit by bit, and quite a lot of bench work. We got carburetors, we got a lot of stuff going on, so make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of the excitement as the motorcycle comes back together better than ever. And this is William from Boxer 2 Valve reminding you that you'll find links to a lot of the parts and tools that we discussed here below in the video, as well as on our website. And we hope that you do visit us at boxer2valve.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Stay tuned for more episodes coming up. We're having a blast, and we'll see you soon again.